I'm Farhan Dalla, transformational trainer, and welcome to Elevate Your Life, a transformational podcast, an invitation to take the journey towards your deepest self. It is my intention to inspire you to connect, move, and meditate. We'll tap in, tune in, and dive in, and together learn and reflect from authentic, real, and transformative conversations. Let's get started.
Farhan, if you can, if at all it's possible, please play this for your mom. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Ya Ali Madad, Auntie.
You're listening to the voice of my guest today, Mariam Magsi, a very special friend. And today we are talking art and grief relief. Born and raised in Pakistan and currently working in Canada, Mariam Magsi is a multidisciplinary artist working in photography, performance, video, installation, and other arts. She holds a master's in fine arts in interdisciplinary art, media, and design from OCAD University and an honors bachelor's of fine arts from the University of Toronto. Magsi's works have been published in Vogue Italia, Vice News, Scene Arabia, She Does the City, CNN, and more. And her multimedia works have been exhibited in renowned Canadian and international galleries and festivals such as Art Gallery of Ontario, Art Gallery of Mississauga, Gallery 44 Center for Contemporary Photography, Artscape Young Place, Contact Photography Festival, International Photography Awards, International Human Rights Festival, Pen and Brush Foundation in New York, John B. Aird Gallery, and more. Mariam is a recipient of the Pride Photo Award in 2015 in Amsterdam, Netherlands, which is advised by World Press Photo. And her MFA thesis on veiling practices associated with Islam was awarded local and international recognition, Excellence in Research Award by OCAD University in 2017. Mariam works with several arts, including lens-based mediums, poetry, performance, sound, documentary, and portraiture. Her ongoing projects include Daughter of the Tribe, a series of self-portraits in traditional cultural garments situated in various landscapes of unceded Indigenous land in Canada, and Dawat Yana Project, a multimedia project that has also culminated in a residency with her art partner, Eric Chung Yang, at the Art Gallery of Ontario, with support from Royal Bank of Canada 2022. I also want to add, Mariam is the photographer behind all the pictures on my current website, farhandala.com, as well as the art cover for this podcast. Mariam, welcome.
Assalamu alaikum, namaste, and hello, Farhan. How are you?
I'm feeling all kinds of emotions today. First of all, gratitude that you're here with me. I've wanted you on this podcast for so long. We have so much to explore and talk about. I'm anxious to dive in. I'm anxious to ask you in-depth questions that I know you're going to enlighten us all on, and also to inspire us with your own personal journey. And I just know you'll have lots to share. So welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to take part in your podcast series around grief relief. And Farhan, I do want to preface by saying that this series has been an incredible resource during my ongoing grieving process. I've learned a lot from you, as well as the culturally sensitive experts you've hosted here. I really enjoyed the segment on channeling Islamic rituals and practices for grief relief with Dr. Shiraz Ismail. And of course, the world-renowned Dr. Amy Novotny was on here a few months ago as well, teaching us the PABR method. So I've learned a lot. Thank you for initiating this important platform. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist or a psychotherapist. I am an artist. So it's a true honor to be here so we can unpack art and grief relief.
Yes, and I too want to thank you for your immense support through my grief journey. Sorry, this is tough, especially on the day that my mom transitioned. The prayer that I played for us at the beginning was hugely significant for me, my mom, and my family. The day that my mom was transitioning, I called you or messaged you from the hospital to tell you what was happening. And you recorded that and asked me to play it for her. And so at 1 p.m. on October 29th, I played it for her. And just shy of 2 hours after that, she transitioned. And I know that she heard that prayer. And to have you part of that transition process was, and still to this day, hugely impactful for me. And I've never forgotten it. And as I listened to that today, it brought back all kinds of emotions. But most importantly, the emotion of gratitude. So thank you so much for that. And also, you were so kind and generous to offer to pray at my mom's celebration of life and recite that prayer again and to lead us for her celebration of life. And it was such an honor to have you recite it so beautifully again for Mom, Mrs. Katundala, myself, and my family. I can't thank you enough. From the bottom of our hearts, once again, Mariam, we are eternally grateful for that.
Of course, Farhan. You know, Surah Fatiha is a really, really powerful prayer. And it's actually one of the first surahs that my mother orally transmitted to me. When she put me to sleep, she would just whisper it into my ears on a nightly basis. And that's actually how I first learned a lot of the prayers in Arabic from the Quran, was through her oral transmission of the prayers to me. So it's always been a very powerful prayer that I channel during difficult moments. And I've noticed that reciting it has helped a lot of my loved ones as well. You know, over the years, you trusted me enough to invite me over to your home. You introduced me not only to your mother, but your other family members as well, for which I am very grateful. The first time I ever walked into your house, your mother called me Beti. She embraced me. And every time I've come over, she was feeding me, talking to me about our desi clothing, sharing all her wonderful adventures and memories with me. She made me feel very special and very loving, especially during the time that my own mother was diagnosed with cancer. That year, I met her quite a bit. She would put her hand on my head. She'd say little prayers for me. And I think both of us, when our mothers were transitioning, even though we weren't physically together both those times, we stayed in constant touch, if you recall, and we kept supporting each other through phone and text right up until our mothers transitioned from this world.
And to this day forward as well. And I just want to rewind a little bit and also acknowledge you for the incredible trailblazing career that you have, for the way in which you beautifully, consciously elevate the world through your art, your award-winning art, and in so many different mediums. I've been truly inspired by you, by your work, since the day that we met. And I want to congratulate you on your most recent nomination. You have been nominated by Afropolitan Canada for the Women of Diversity Summit and Awards, which is an annual event that honors and recognizes women of color who are creating change and space to amplify the voices of those who are traditionally excluded. So congratulations, my friend.
Thank
You
you so
are
much, Farhan.
impacting all of us in so many amazing ways. And I continuously look up to you. I'm always in awe of you. And I'm so glad that you're getting the recognition that you deserve.
Thank you.
Mariam, as you know, the world has been universally experiencing grief. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, and you kind of touched upon it, and maybe you can, if you wish, dive in a bit deeper about what it is that your grief journey has been like.
So, Farhan, my mother passed away in 2019. And I was 34 years old at the time. We are 5 sisters, and my youngest sister was only 17. And so it was obviously a very, very heavy moment for our family. And the days leading up to my mother's passing were also very traumatic. And they were very, very physically exhausting, the exhaustion of which I'm actually feeling even years after. And it manifests in different ways, either in health issues or through traumatic flashbacks, all of which I'm dealing with in therapy, mindfulness practices, art making. And so right when she passed, one of the first things I began doing is I started reaching for every item around her that her body had engaged with. So whether it was the ventilator, whether it was the fabrics that we were draping her in, whether it was cups, syringes, whatever had touched her body, I even collected a thermometer that has her last recorded temperature on it. And I piled up all of these items into my suitcase, along with some other precious items from the home. And I migrated all of these items to Canada from Pakistan because she passed away in Pakistan. And for some time, I was engaging with them, and I still have them in my home. I've often thought about what the journey of these items is going to be. But thus far, I've incorporated them into installations. I've engaged with them in Lake Ontario. I've created photographs with them. Some of the works were exhibited at the Glory Hole Gallery under the title of I Can't Breathe. And so I think this was one of the first moments that I realized that I'm chasing the physical manifestation of who my mother was by looking for her body in these elements. So from there, I graduated on to really engaging with her fabrics a little deeper, sometimes by wearing them, but also incorporating them in various landscape photography, in installation-based works. From there, I've also been engaging with all of the archives that she's left behind. So photographs, videos, audio clips. And so there's really, it's been a dynamic sort of, it's not a linear journey in any way. Grief comes and goes, as you know. And at this time also, there is immense grief in my life. I would say it's been ongoing since she passed. I'm still not on the other side of it. And compounded with the grief of my mother's loss, there's also grief coming from a variety of other sources right now. And I'm still trying to understand her transition from this world. And I find relief in spaces where there is art. And so the space closures and exhibition cancellations were very, very tough for me and our industry. And despite the pivots and remote opportunities that are emerging, which I'm deeply grateful for, there's, of course, the loss of what once was and if we'll get back to that or not. I'm mourning the daily deaths of people we don't know, as well as the people close to us that are leaving. We have lost multiple people to COVID in our Magsi clan and extended networks, and I haven't even begun processing that, to be honest with you. I have family members and family friends who are struggling with severe impacts of long COVID a year after their initial infections. It's very difficult to see how the virus has taken an ongoing toll on their bodies. So much of my career was about traveling to places near and far, collecting images, stories, audio clips, and videos from humans across the planet. And that is no longer accessible to me at this time either. So, I'm someone who's always chosen to remain incredibly rooted to my homeland, Pakistan, and my large maternal and paternal families. I used to return home at least 2 to 4 times a year in order to continue fostering these important relationships in my communities. And since the pandemic, I have been home once. And I was not able to physically hold my sisters, my father, aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends. And I haven't physically embraced these family members since, I guess, 2019. So some of the ways in which I've been finding alternate ways to connect with these kinds of moments and memories is one aspect of my practice is collage making. So I began to reach for travel receipts, travel paraphernalia, flyers, boarding passes, passport photos, old passports, currency collected from various countries, and really in a very active way with my hands, placing them on canvases, paper, doing transfers of the collages into the digital world, and then processing them a bit more in post-production. So just giving you an example of one way, that travel or some of these aspects of my life pre-COVID may have been taken away, but can I still hold on to that? Can I bring it back in my life in another way?
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like your experience has been just like all of ours, in that all of us have experienced what maybe mini griefs and multiple intense large griefs. And to process all of that is very difficult. I love how you have the skills and the talents of art. And I guess my next question for you is, how has grief changed your art and the expression of that art?
Farhan, all of the trauma and grief I have encountered in my life has strengthened my practice, adding buckets of resilience into the ways in which I conduct my life and make my art. At the same time, I also find myself to be a little bit hardened, and I'm trying to find a balance between what Egyptian American feminist Mona Al-Tahawi calls softness and rage. And that in this dynamic human experience, we are able to hold all of these contradictory and conflicting yet seamlessly connected emotions and reactions. I now don't think about audiences to target with my work. I've turned inward quite a bit. And in doing so with specificity and intentionality, more and more people from across cultures and ethnicities have been reaching out, connecting with my art, my words, and my voice. I would say that I am more process-oriented today than I was before. I am not attached to outcomes per se, but rather I'm falling in love with the journey of making. And my primary aims with why I make art are far more clear to me today. I use art as a tool to make sense of this world. I use art as a tool to educate myself and others. I use art as a tool to shift perspectives, disturb the status quo, and to impact social change. I'm not sure if you know this, but quite recently I joined the Toronto Police Community Advisory Panel. And I've been working with an incredible group of thinkers in the city of Toronto. We are developing initiatives in dismantling racism, xenophobia, and biases within law enforcement. So, for example, during one of our sessions, I encouraged the college trainers to take emerging police officers to important, significant art exhibitions around the city, especially the works that are amplifying Black and Indigenous voices and representation, so that the police officers can engage with this material in a new way outside of the classroom through art. You know, Farhan, art has the power to transform entire societies, and it can have a huge impact on public health and well-being, especially public art that is more accessible than art that is hidden away in institutions and galleries. And speaking of exhibitions, you know, in case I forget later, the AGO has an incredible show up at this time called Fragments of Epic Memory. It comes down on the 21st, and I highly encourage our listeners to pop in and take a look and engage with the Caribbean and its diaspora through this exhibition. And with regards to public art, there are several works up at this time. I highly recommend taking out some time and engaging with them. So the Union Station has a large-scale work about slavery in Canada. It's called The House of Baby, and it's by artists Camille Turner and Kamal Pirpai. And then there's a Markham-based artist, Esma Mohamud. She has a massive public work up at the Western Harbour Castle. And this work invites us to rethink masculinity, but specifically Black masculinity.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Art obviously has a huge impact in our world, and you have a beautiful way of expressing important messages, whether it's activism, social change, and now with the personal journey and experience with grief. How has grief changed you as a person?
Grief has impacted me as a person. Within art, while my practice has strengthened, I've noticed a lot of behavioral changes since my mother's transition. Farhan, I was very extroverted before my mother passed away. You know, not a weekend went by when I wasn't either at a large gathering or hosting big groups of friends and loved ones in my home. So I definitely feel like I have introverted quite a bit since then. I'm also having a little bit of a difficult time reintegrating into society with the world gradually reopening. I am very comfortable making art in isolated landscapes, especially in nature. And I wonder if this is also a way to establish a sense of personal safety. I feel uncomfortable and unsafe around large groups of people, and this wasn't always the case. Loud sounds and crowds are incredibly overwhelming. I've also developed many health issues after my mother's passing, so I have to think about art making in a much more ergonomic way today. I'm specifically struggling with chronic vestibular migraines and fluctuating blood pressure issues that are in control now, but also breast tissue changes that we're monitoring with my brilliant healthcare team in Toronto. The migraines specifically seem to complement my introverted behavior because literally anything can be a trigger on some days. Loud sounds, harsh lighting, exposure to stressful situations, even fast head tilts. So really everything has to be altered right now, from workouts to diets to even the smells within my house. And I was obsessed with scented candles and incense sticks. Incense sticks are a big part of how I conduct my rituals, and they make a regular appearance in my installation-based works. Now I can't light one up without getting a headache. So all of this is relatively new to me, and I am learning how to manage it. For any fellow migraineurs that might be listening, there is a great community on Instagram called Migraine Strong. I've learned so much from the experts there. There's something called the treatment pie, which is like an intelligent little visual pie chart that shows you how you can regain control over your life when living with chronic pain through a combination of medication, therapy, mindfulness, exercise, etc. And eventually, I do want to return to travel-based projects, Farhan. It was such an important part of my career. And it will be interesting to see how I navigate this planet with this invisible disability. It's not impossible. And there's a lot of tailoring one has to do, which is why I mentioned the community, because it's through meeting other migraineurs that I realized, oh, okay, there is a life with chronic pain. It just looks a bit different, but joy can be cultivated in unique ways. On the other side of this, Farhan, to be honest, I've never felt more comfortable or confident in my skin than I do today. I recognize, acknowledge my power, my agency, my needs, and my boundaries louder than ever before. And a big part of waking up after my mother transitioned from this world has been a better understanding about, yes, there will be grief, there will be tragedy, there will be chaos, there will be mourning, but right alongside, there will be moments where we will continue to cultivate joy, we will pursue pleasure, and we will prioritize our well-being.
Yes, and I couldn't agree with you more. As you know, Mariam, I turned to art myself to support not just my grieving process, but a way in which to honor my mom, her sense of style and the way she dressed. And I've talked about it a bit before and touched upon it, but I created portraits in honor of her, framing, 3 of her favorite outfits. And I found pictures of her wearing them and I put them at the center of the portraits. And what I discovered through that whole journey for me was that it deepened my relationship with my mom, which I was not expecting. It was a way in which to connect to her energy on the other side. I felt her presence throughout the entire journey, guiding me, supporting me, but allowing me to get to know the being of the spirit that she is now, as opposed to the physical person, even though it started as a physical process, honoring the physical side of her in many ways. What I also was surprised was the way in which that energy came through in the portraits and filled my home and allowed me to experience her vibration and her energy in a way in which I had never known before. And so my relationship with her is improving. The love is deepening. The bond of love is strengthening on an everyday basis. And so I was wondering if you could share how your relationship with your mom has changed through your art. You mentioned the rituals and the ways in which you honored her, and that how some of those rituals are part of your art installation. But has any of that led to any surprises in the dynamic that you share in its existence in the way in which it is now versus when she was here in the physical?
Absolutely. So, after her passing, as you know, grief, you can be triggered almost anywhere at any time. At least that's how it's been with me. It shows up unannounced. And it shows up like a thick, heavy blanket of intense emotional pain. It specifically overtakes the areas around my heart and chest and is very different from a panic or anxiety attack, both of which I also experience now and then. So during my anxiety or panic attacks, I often feel like I am unable to breathe. But when grief appears and begins to take over, I can still breathe. I just feel dilapidated. And this is usually followed by episodes of crying and wailing, sounds that I also use within my art. So while I'm all for sitting in and with that pain, if I stay there for too long, I become physically and emotionally exhausted. So a point arrives when I get up and I take a decision that I want to do something action-oriented with this pain. Some days that looks like pulling out a recipe collected from my mother and other family members, making a food item that they would make for me and feed me with their hands. Of course, my imagination plays a huge role here. Like you said, that your process with the portraits, and they are absolutely beautiful. I can see them right now behind you, and I'm in love with them. Auntie is just looking down on us with all of her grace and glory. So similar to that, my imagination plays a huge role here. I try to embody my mother, my ancestors, deceased family members, living family members, and I try to imagine that I'm still their child. They are all around me. They are continuing to feed and nourish me, except today the actions are being done by me, for me. Other days, it can look like recording certain sounds that I emit from my mouth. They can be chants of prayers, they can be loud chanting sounds, repetition, humming. I also engage with my mother's poetic and artistic works. She was a very, very successful poet, and in her lifetime published 3 books, one of which is a poetic and feminist interpretation of Prophet Muhammad's sayings, or the hadiths. And I love to draw, paint, and perform with my body using gestures and physical actions to give that pain a channel to transform into something meaningful, and also an opportunity that I can learn from. I'm constantly asking, what is this process trying to teach me today? And then another component of that is being able to share that process with others, be it through our social media channels, through our websites, through our writing, through our presentation of the works, so that eventually we all feel a little more connected and a little less isolated in our unique grief journeys.
I love that. You touched on your family on the other side, as well as your mom, and you and I have had many conversations in regards to legacy. And so I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing with us how the concept of legacy may have changed since your mother's transitioning, and its influence in your art and what you're creating at this time.
Farhan, that's a very interesting question. And I don't think I am attached with the public's perception of me so much so, because so much of that is quite hard to control. And so I don't quite care much for what will be said about me, but I think very deeply about my mortality. And now that my shield, my mother, is gone, I also think about legacy quite a bit as a woman choosing to live a child-free life at this time. Farhan, I've spent the first 18 years of my life in Karachi, Pakistan, and I've spent the last 18 years of my life in Toronto, Canada. So I'm obviously thinking about legacy quite a bit. And Mona Al-Tahawi, the feminist I mentioned before, she wrote something so profound that really hit the core of my being. I am the full stop at the end of me. And so my hope would be that humans across generations will continue to engage with my words and with my art for a long time to come. After all, my art is my legacy.
And how would you say your mother has influenced your art?
Wow, that's a great question. And really, my art practice does root back to her. So it's interesting, Farhan, my story is opposite to what you would usually hear from most desis in our South Asian communities. I really wanted to become a doctor growing up, by the way.
I did not know that.
Yes, I wanted to open hospitals. I wanted to serve as a medical professional. And I was very, very excited about that as a career. But I was actually dragged to art classes, kicking and screaming. And all of the tools that I use today in my work, recording devices, paint brushes, cameras, these were all tools that were put into my hands at a very young age, when my mother strictly said, absolutely not, no daughter of mine shall be a doctor. You are going to be an artist. She supported the arts immensely in Pakistan, especially classical music from the subcontinent. And she perceived the arts to be a very noble and honorable field to pursue. And she also pushed us to think about legacy quite often. Despite being a mother to 5 girls, she never gave up her passion, which was writing, as I mentioned earlier, and successfully published books in her lifetime. She had immense love for our Prophet and his family, and she often prioritized the women of Islam, such as Bibi Khadija, Bibi Fatima, and Bibi Aisha in her poetry and in her essays. She also embodied them and their sayings by either memorializing them in jewelry designs or hosting specific religious events in praise of them. And it was very interesting to see her engagement with religion, with ritual, and with the arts, and how she used various forms of expression to accelerate her knowledge while reaching audiences in Pakistan, in India, in Iran, and even all the way here in Canada. Her works have been sung by renowned classical musicians across the world. And I'm now reconnecting with my mother tongue, Urdu, by engaging with her works and bringing her work into my practice, which is also a primary method through which I keep her spirit alive and remain connected with her. Farhan, we don't have many visual records, if any, of the women and girls in my maternal and paternal family, especially before the generations of our grandmothers. And so my mother, on the other hand, engaged with every recording device you can imagine. She has left behind archives and archives of photos, audios, videos, letters, notebooks, journals, sketches. There's so much material. And I'm very much the same. I document every moment with such a passion. And while on the one hand, it's beautiful to engage with the archives, it's also incredibly sad and devastating at the same time. There's a photographer I admire and whose works I've studied at length, Nan Golden. And she once said, I used to think that I could never lose anyone if I photographed them enough. In fact, my pictures show me how much I've lost.
Wow. That gives me a whole different perspective every time I now scroll through Instagram or Facebook and all the pictures that I've taken. And that has a huge shift in meaning for me now when I look at those photos. That said, the experience of grief of looking at those photos now or in any way, can you share with us how you see art can help us with grief and how it could be an impactful tool to manage our grief from your personal experience?
Farhan, art has played an absolutely monumental role, as has community, as has psychotherapy. And it's really in psychotherapy, while working through this process with professional experts in Toronto, I realized I was already doing the grieving. I just didn't have the language around it. So I was already engaging with archives. I'm already touching my mother's materials that have survived her, that I've inherited, but I just didn't quite have the appropriate language. And I now understand a lot better how I use this art as a tool to improve and manage my mental health, to process grief, to keep deceased ancestors and family members alive, as a continuation of culture while creating something new, because there's always that hybridization as we move forward. And I'm one who likes to keep the old and new connected And art obviously serves as a bridge between those two worlds as well.
I love that. Mariam, I want to ask you this question, and I've never asked this to anyone before, but let's flash forward years ahead. And inshallah, it's many years ahead, but it's your funeral. And what are you hoping people will say about you at the end of your life?
Farhan, that's a really fascinating question. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm no longer attached with what the public perception of me is, because as I said, that's quite hard to control. But I've been thinking quite deeply about where it is that I want to be laid to rest. This comes up quite often in my thoughts around my own mortality. Do I want to be buried on Canadian soil? Or do I want my body to be transported to Pakistan and laid to rest eternally with my family members? My paternal family's historic graveyard is in Jhalmaksi, Balochistan. My maternal family's graveyard is in Lahore, Pakistan. There's no space left there, otherwise I would have loved to be buried near my mother. So most likely, if I choose Pakistan as my resting place, I would probably choose between the city of Karachi, where I was born and raised, or our ancestral lands in Jhalmaksi. But what I do know is that I want my resting site to be showered with rose petals regularly. I'd like someone to leave bird food on the side so that pigeons, sparrows, and little ants can come by and eat to their heart's content. And I would really, really love to be buried under the shade of a tree.
Beautiful. Amin. And so, Mariam, as we wrap up, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing with us what projects you have coming up and where we could view your work, whether in person or virtually.
Of course, thank you, Farhan, for giving me this opportunity to connect with wider audiences through your podcast. After losing my mother, a big part of me also feels like I lost access to ancestral languages, customs, intergenerational wisdom. And so the Dawatian project, which is a project that I'm working on collaboratively with my art partner, Eric Cheng Young, it became a very creative way to reignite connection with community and culture, and also learn about the history of food and hospitality norms in South Asia. So Dawat in Urdu and Yin in Chinese imply banquet or an invitation or bringing people together. And an iteration of the project under the name of Dawatian Banquet is being hosted at the Art Gallery of Ontario. And we're very grateful for the support of the AGO RBC Artist in Residence Program 2022. And we're working with guest artists, mentors from the AGO, and we're examining various components of the banquet through sensory experiences. So there will be food, history, recipes, storytelling, travel, and think of it like a virtual potluck developed over a period of time. And my art partner, Eric, is actually designing the entire process-based web platform from scratch. So on Instagram, you can follow us, Dawatian Project. There's also a blog, dawatianproject.tumblr.com. And on my personal Instagram, which is Mariam_Magsi, you'll keep seeing updates. So feel free to follow me. You can also connect with me through my website, www.mariammagsi.com. And you'll be able to engage with a variety of my projects, both ongoing and upcoming.
And I will have all those links in the notes section of this podcast. So please feel free to check out those links and follow Mariam and her incredible work. You had me at food. You don't have to convince me anymore. I will definitely participate. And I hope soon that we can gather in person again, Mariam, and share a meal at this home, at this table. in my dining room where we've shared meals before. It may feel a
Inshallah.
little different without mom being physically here, but nonetheless, we will set a place for her and your mom and all our ancestors and have them join us for a meal. And so, Mariam, I want to thank you, as always, for elevating our lives and our world and for being my guest today. This was such a memorable conversation and experience for me, as I knew it would be. I wish you continued success always. May you always be blessed in every part of your life. And may our mothers and our ancestors always rest in eternal peace. Ameen.
Ameen, Summa Ameen. Thank you, Farhan. Sending you lots of love.
I'm Farhan Dalla. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's episode of Elevate Your Life, a transformational podcast. I hope today's conversation has elevated you in some way and inspired you to connect, move, and meditate. I'd really appreciate your support by following and rating this podcast. Come back soon and join me for another transformative conversation.